what caught your ear was the mentioning of education, health, those sectors. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. The new minister was walking a very tight rope, and I think he came well when it came to education, health and social development, because these are key areas where we have to resuscitate the economy. And above all, on the issue of ensuring that each and every school has appropriate sanitation, giving sanitary towels to our girls, it's bringing about dignity to our education as well. I think those issues are welcome, and also bringing some experts in our health sector and resuscitating our buildings that are so dilapidated at the moment. These are issues that should be welcome. On the issue of corruption, fraud, irregular expenditure and also wasteful expenditure, I think he came out very well. He was very minimal when it comes to the issue of job creation, but he also touched on the issue of township and also rural economy development, ensuring that some money is given to the municipal infrastructure as well. So those are issues that are very important, but what is the key is to ensure that we give some jobs to our young people, because the key challenges of this country are unemployment, poverty and inequality. I think next time he will touch on that, because this was merely a statement.
Prof, thank you so much for your time. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Bulelani. I think he's got the TG of the ANC with him right now. Bulelani, it's all yours.
Well, thanks so much, Abra. Yes, we've got the ANC Treasurer General, Mr. Paul Mashatile. We'll go straight into it. Do you think this is a pro-poor budget?
Well, firstly, let me say the ANC welcomes the broad thrust of the budget. Obviously, it's under difficult economic conditions, but yes, pro-poor. We welcome the zero rating of basic things that affect poor people, including sanitary pads, particularly more support for children in poor schools. But what is good with this budget is that it is focusing a lot on investments. As the minister was saying, tomorrow there is an investment conference starting in Johannesburg. So a lot of funding priorities are going into economic activity, strengthening the stimulus package that the president has announced. The minister went to town to explain how funding is going to be made available, particularly on those 5 priorities that the president had announced to stimulate the economy. So it is bringing back confidence in the economy, and that we will, in the long run, see recovery of our economy, creating necessary employment and actually addressing basic services to poor communities.
All right, Mr. Paul Mashatile, thank you so much for your time, and continuing to give you a cross-section of political analysis and reaction to this mini-budget speech. We now cross to the other side. Arabila, I think you're standing by.
Indeed, I am, Bulelani. Thank you so much for that. As you said, continuing to give you that rollout and extensive coverage of the medium-term budget policy statement delivered by the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni. I'm joined now by Fedusa's Dennis George now as we unpack some thoughts of the union. Mr. George, thank you so much again for your time. We spoke a little bit earlier on. Did it meet your expectations?
Yeah, I think the government laid down the rules that they reprioritize spending to support inclusive economic growth and employment creation. And then government have also made a point to prioritize education, health, community and social development, which is very critical. I think the provision of the sanitized pads for young girls in the schools, I think that is critical. But also the fact that government have made provision to appoint 2,000 health professionals, because we need people in professional services to care for our people and so on. There's a number of other measures where government want to, specifically with the infrastructure, to bring in the army, to provide support, because we can see there's a problem, but if we're not going to do something about the problem, it's not going to help us going forward. But we think it was a right approach of the budget, and we think, going forward, it's going to help us to ignite growth and job creation.
Certainly forming part of the cohesive nature of this budget and what government is aiming to achieve. Dennis George, appreciate your time there. I'll cross back to my colleague Bulelani.
Well, thanks so much again, Arabile. We're now joined by the Chief Whip of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Mr. Floyd Shibambu. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thoughts on this mini budget by the Finance Minister?
Look, the summary of the medium-term budget policy statement is that it's underwhelming. What the new minister did was to provide a lot of thorough diagnosis of the South African economic challenges, but he never offered concrete solutions. He identified that our debt to GDP ratio is now going towards uncontrollable levels, but he has never said as to how do we get out of huge debt levels. He has never spoken about thorough, proper tax reforms, the tax avoidance issues that I've been speaking about in terms of what should happen. He never offered immediate or medium or long-term solutions in terms of how do we get out of the low economic growth, because the majority of the things that he spoke about increased expenditure in infrastructure are things that have been happening, have been announced before. So overall, the whole intervention was underwhelming. I don't think that people must have any renewed hope that there's going to be anything different done. And he has actually fired very worrying shots in terms of the size of the public service and the wage bill. So workers must be very worried, because it looks like he ultimately is going to cut down the public service, meaning that a lot of public servants are going to lose their jobs, because if there's one thing that will never happen is to reduce people's salaries. That is not a viable option. So the only thing which he is left with is to cut down the public service, and workers should never agree to the cutting down of the public service, because there are lots of other options that can be explored. So instead of government relying on consultants and advisory services which are external, it must then retrain the people who are in the public service to deliver services to the state directly, because currently they're just conduits of contractors from outside, and they're not adding much value that is needed for a state to maximally function and give benefits to our people. But in the manner in which it was presented, it is underwhelming, really. There is nothing really that came out that we can say that there's now renewed hope. South Africa is in a technical recession, and it looks like with the manner in which they are approaching these issues, they were going to go into full recession at the end of this economic year.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Floyd Shibambu, the Chief Whip of the Economic Freedom Fighters. We're now going to cross back to Abra Babia on the other side of the precinct.
With me right now, I have Nabayomzi Kwankwa of the UDM here in Parliament. You expressed some issue with the bailout to SAA, if I'm correct.
Well, let me start by saying that we're where we are today because of government's cavalier attitude to fiscal rectitude. I mean, we've been warning them about the mismanagement of the finances, and here we are today. We have a country that is broke, to put it mildly. The bottom line with SAA is that what happens with these SOEs, it seems like government continues to throw money at the problem rather than addressing the problem. I mean, what happened to the people who squandered the bailouts that were given to those institutions before? You have an SAA that did not submit financials for the past 3 financial years. They even missed the deadline, even the September deadline. But now what are we doing? We're just giving them money. And if they squander this money, there will be no accountability. No one will go to jail for it. There's just a culture of impunity in the African National Congress. The second issue, I think, which is important, is that yes, indeed, is correct by saying you are going to lose R1 billion, say by zero rating 1 or 2 or 3 items. But the bottom line is that value-added tax contributes about 300 billion rands to the fiscus, as opposed to the 217 billion rands that corporate income tax contributes to the fiscus. So it's about time that the ANC government touches the corporate income tax as well. But the other issue is that when it comes to zero rating items, we started this debate way back in 2015 when most parties were fast asleep, and we said they needed to do a proper study about it and make sure that they phase it in properly. What is the point now of having items that are only going to be zero rated in April next year when you're already generating revenue this year? So it means that the ANC is actually playing tricks with us. It's not committed to this thing, and you're only zero rating 3 items. But we must say that we must welcome the fact that they decided to zero rate sanitary towels as a good step.
At least there's one thing you're happy about.
Correct.
Thank you so much. I'm now crossing back over to my colleague Arabile.
Thank you so much there, Abra. Well, I'm joined by Enoch Godongwana, Economic Transformation Policy Head at the ANC. Baba, thank you so much for your time. Some would say, and we've just heard a moment ago, that we are perhaps throwing money at the problem. Would you agree with that sentiment, or do you think that this MTBP has perhaps shared a distinctive sign of where South Africa is headed?
Look, it's a well-crafted budget under difficult circumstances. Slow growth, as you can see, the growth has been revised downwards, and that's what has got implications for revenue. But despite that, there's been massive focus on investment, particularly on infrastructure. For the first time, when you see the investment by general government exceeding investment by the state-owned enterprise, so there's a balanced, focused budget rather than consumption, but on investment.
Yeah. Do you believe that this is a sure sign then for the ratings agencies, for investment firms as well, to come back into South Africa?
The question is for the investment community and the rating agencies, is there a commitment from our side on our fiscal stance? The answer is yes. Is there a growth story? The answer is yes. The investment on infrastructure is part of constructing a growth model.
The finance minister did ask that we leave the Reserve Bank alone and stop peppering them with the questions of nationalization, etc., and questioning their mandate. Will indeed the ANC be agreeing to that?
That is generally the position of the ANC. The ANC has never questioned its independence of the Reserve Bank. Even from conference, when we moved out of conference, we said the independence of the Reserve Bank is sacrosanct. What we're talking about is a different picture completely, the shareholder part of the Reserve Bank.
Mr. Godongwana, I appreciate your time there. ANC Economic Transformation and Policy Head, Mr. Enoch Godongwana. Bulelani, it's over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Arabile. Now joining me for more reaction is the leader of the IFP, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. In the medium term, do you think we're going in the right direction?
Well, I think that the minister had an unenviable task, because the fact of the matter is that the country is in dire straits. That therefore, only a magician could have done better than he has done. I've appreciated the fact that he points out, first of all, that the state-owned enterprises are going to be reconsidered. But then at the same time, we learned that South African Airways is going to get 5 billion. So that's a contradiction. Then also, as far as VAT is concerned, which concerns all South Africans, the cost of food. He says that, the cake flour and the bread flour are going to be zero rated. But then, of course, he then laments the fact that thereby we lose more than 1 billion. There are some very good things, of course, that he said, because I think that we as South Africans must realize that the challenge is not just the challenge to government, it's a challenge to all of us as South Africans. Now, when he says, for instance, that agriculture is going to be the driving force for economic recovery, it sounds very good to me. But at the same time, I say that as far as our people in the rural areas and everywhere have not revived the subsistence economy that we used to have before, I don't think that as far as food security is concerned that we can say that we're anywhere near, getting over our problems. So also, some of the things that the minister said were also good, such as dealing, for instance, with some of the thieves and other people, like people that have looted the bank and others that they are going to be dealt with. I really hope that is going to be done. So that there were some good messages about what we should be doing. But nevertheless, to have expected more than this would have been too optimistic for me. I didn't expect that he would do any better like this, because even money where it is spent, it's like pouring it into a bottomless bucket.
All right, thank you so much, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the leader of the IFP, just basically describing it as an unenviable task that the finance minister had. We'll cross now to Abra on the other side.
Bulelani, thank you very much. With me I have Mr. Mosiya Lekota, of course the leader of the Congress of the People. Sir, thank you for speaking to us today. Do you have anything positive to say about today's mini-budget speech?
Yeah, well, look, the positive thing is that the minister was very accurate in identifying the problems. And of course he exposed the fact that the country is in deep debt, that we don't have money, that we can't go on borrowing and borrowing forever because the mountain of debt is already too high. So, but what could he do? So he still had to go and borrow money again.
If I could just stop you there, I see this gentleman has a poster here speaking specifically about education, and the minister did make a special mention of that again. Do you think we're going to be seeing any changes in that area? Because that is one of the key focus areas.
No, you won't see any change in that area now. This is now October. It's the end of the year. And the beginning of the year will be a holiday, and then beginning of the year. The problem is not medium term. The problem is the problem of governance. Since the ANC became government, especially since Zuma took over from Thabo Mbeki, movement in any positive direction really ceased, because the debt, which at that time was about 28 billion rand, almost we were finished with it, is now climbed to 3 trillion. That is where the problem lies. The people of South Africa must simply clean parliament and clean government. They must vote the ANC out of national, provincial, local government structures and put in new men and women. This country has got 57 million people. Put in men and women who are clean, who are not going to perpetuate corruption, theft of money. All this money that we have lost has not been lost in war. It's been lost in the hands of the men and women who are in government today. Put different men and women who will understand that
I'm so sorry, I have to stop you right there. That's Mr. Lekota of COPE, obviously expressing his concerns and unhappiness to us right now. I think I'm now crossing over back to my colleague Arabile.
Yeah, certainly, Abra. Thank you so much again for that. Of course, unpacking the reaction of business, and we're joined by none other than Sandile Zungu from the Black Business Council, and even Christy Viljoen from PwC as an economist there as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Sandile, let's unpack from you. Were you happy with the sentiment brought forward by Tito Mboweni?
Well, I think the presentation firstly was very eloquently done. I think the minister brought his style, and there was an element of sensitivity to the needs of the people. I mean, indicating that you are zero rating sanitary pads, flour, that says you are sensitive to the needs of the people. What will have disappointed us in business, especially black business, is the downward revision of growth forecast for the economy. Fundamentally, you have got to grow the economy. Yeah. That's where the focus must be. More than 2% in the short term, medium term, well in excess of 4% to really deal with the social challenges. Yeah. I think the focus on local government, that there's going to be a greater focus on assisting local government in terms of capacity and wastage and malfeasance, is sending the right kind of message. And greater detail on reprioritization of expenditure towards those areas which will stimulate the economy. Obviously not sufficient details there, but there's an indication. Infrastructure, small business, township economies, agriculture, that's wonderful. It's to be welcomed.
Yeah. Christy, your thoughts? I mean, does it stave away the ratings agencies? Does it keep them at bay a little bit, despite the worsening growth forecast, debt going even higher as well? Does it send a clear message to them that we are maintaining fiscal consolidation?
I think they're going to be concerned. You're correct. Growth was revised lower. Government debt is continuing to climb. The deficit isn't shrinking. So the rating agencies will definitely be concerned. We've heard some positive comments from them over the past few months. When they look at these numbers, I'm not so sure. We're going to have some tough talk with them. The next round of reviews will be in November. It sets out a good plan of where we want to be, but in South Africa we're good at making plans, but implementing, that's always the challenge. So I think the speech was good. I like what I'm hearing from Minister Mboweni, but he's not the one making all the decisions on what's happening, and we need an effort from everywhere in government, private private sector and Labour to get these things fixed.
Yeah, we'll certainly take a look at that and hopefully unpack it a whole lot more, and the sentiment should clearly be clear at a future stage. Bulelani.
Well, thanks again, Arabile. Of course, the finance minister has got everybody talking around that quote by Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. Now, joining me is the PAC MP, Mr. Lutando Mbinda. What kind of age are you seeing out of this mini budget?
Yeah, the way we see, this is the same rhetoric that we have been listening to for the past or the previous finance ministers. There is nothing new, but we do not doubt the ability of Tito Mboweni, and we wish him all the best, and we understand that this is just a medium-term budget statement, but at the same time the issue with us is not about the individual, the issue is about the policy directives of the ruling party, which have failed the indigenous, the poor of the poorest, dismally. So that's where our problem is. I do not have even to tell you about the high rate of unemployment, about the poverty levels, about people going to bed without food. But what we are interested in as the PAC, and what I think we must appreciate, as little as it is, the 16.5 billion injection, more especially to agriculture, because our belief is that our people should not be beggars, they should be independent, they should be self-reliant and self-sufficient. That is why we always see the land issue, the restoration of land, as the primary focus. So immediately you talk agriculture, you talk land. Of course, land is not only agriculture, we mean everything, including the resources, as you know. But the speech, the policy directives of the ruling party, I must say, they have failed our people, and they will continue to fail as long as our people continue voting for the same ruling party, which is very corrupt. You look at the level of corruption. And then again, I appreciate, more especially when you look at, you'll listen to him saying Treasury now will work very close with Auditor General, but I am hoping that they will also encourage Auditor General to expedite the issue of performance auditing, because our problem...
Let's leave it there, Mr. Mbinda. We're out of time. I'm sorry for that. No Mr. Lutando Mbinda, PAC MP. I believe now we're crossing back to you, Arabile.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bulelani. Well, Colin Coleman from Goldman Sachs joins me now as we unpack his thoughts. Colin, the reprioritization of funds, perhaps not made as explicitly clear, but it does sort of help to give a clear path that we are indeed spending this money over the medium-term framework, and we will focus on these particular areas. You happy?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is improve the quality of the funds expenditure that they have, and you saw that also with the creation of this project management office around infrastructure. So cutting out corruption in the actual procurement of projects is very important, and clearly that's on the agenda, and I think the finance minister seems very clear on that. Obviously the fiscal ratios broadly were slightly weaker than the market anticipated, so you've seen the rand weaken by about 1% in response to that, and that's the global markets looking at the debt levels, looking at the expenditure to revenue ratios. The revenue ratios, the revenue itself is less than anticipated, expenditure the same, so the overall ratios are looking weaker, and that's obviously going to play on people's minds. I don't think that will be sufficient to change the rating agencies' views on South Africa, and obviously this was a masterful performance by the finance minister, effectively dealing with the facts at hand.
Very quickly as well, 0.7% growth for the year. Ambitious? Possible?
No, I think that's, it's clearly a very disappointing outcome. We have 2% population growth. To have 0.7% economic growth is our biggest problem. It means people are getting poorer. So we need growth rates in excess of population growth, and we need to get there fast. Goldman Sachs growth rate projection for 2019 is 2.4% relative to, I think, the 1.7% that they're projecting for 2019. So we're more bullish than than them. But again, I'd say that is not that ambitious relative to population growth. We need to do better with growth. That is our overall biggest problem in the country.
Colin Coleman, appreciate your time. Colin Coleman there from Goldman Sachs. Ebra, back to you.
Arabile, thank you so much. With me right now I have a gentleman. He's not a politician, he's not a member of parliament, he's not an economist. He's actually just a concerned citizen who took a train all the way from Wellington to Cape Town to Parliament today to come and represent, or to come and make his voice heard. And of course this is a parliament of the people, so he's just here, you know, because he wants his voice to be heard. But I want to let him speak for himself. Sir, who are you? Why are you here today? And I mean, obviously you were concerned about education. What exactly drove you to come here today?
You were correct when you said that I'm a concerned parent. My name is Christo Pinar. I'm from Wellington. And then Wellington, where we stay, ons kinders word gangsters. Op een simpele rede. Ons kinders het niks om te doen in middags as hulle die skool het kom. Al die hoë skole in Wellington, Weltevier sekondêr en van Wykplek sekondêr. En ons ouer en onderwysersvergaderinge sê die onderwysers vir ons dat daar's net een set handboeke vir al die grade op die hoë skole. Nou die kinders kan nie gaan huiswerk doen as hulle van die skool afkom nie. En dis hoekom kan hulle nie gaan leer en hulle werk hier sien nie. En dis hoekom as hulle punte baie laag as dit in eksamens kom. En dit maak dat ons kinders dryf. En
ek wil net gou vra, die minister het gepraat van hy gaan 'n ekstra klein boost gee aan education. Does this at least make you feel a bit better?
A klein boost van na education se kant toe. Dat het ons beter voel. Ek dink dat education moet geprioritiseer word. Want is baie belangrik. Ons weet ons kom nou al lank al en ons kinders, they drop out of school because they don't get work because of the quality of the education they have. So they become gangsters. So if there's a boost, the boost must be really a big boost. Yes.
Christo, dankie vir jou tyd.
Baie dankie.
I think I'm crossing back to my colleague Arabile right now, if that's correct.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Abraham. Joined by Afzal Khan there from Raft Consulting. Afzal, let's talk about this now. We spoke a little bit earlier, and the rand has now today lost 1.1%. But is it really because of the speech? Do you think that the speech was perhaps negative in a sense?
So there's nothing really in the speech that can have such a quick impact. So it's probably other external factors. The negatives, I think, that came out of the speech is 27.4 billion shortfall expected to February on revenue, but coupled with the fact that there's an extra 30 billion of wage spend that was unbudgeted, that is unbudgeted. It means your deficit is actually 57 billion. You know, so when you look at it like that, that could be a negative. We'll see how the ratings agencies, because that's kind of your analysts that are watching this. I don't think the currency speculators play such an immediate role in it. So yeah, we'll see what the analysts say.
Sentiment out of it though, he used words like "I will," "we will make sure," and you know, he made sure that it came off as if it's authoritative and this will finally get done. Are you convinced?
So he told stories also. Yeah. So I like the fact that he was using "I," because it does look like some of this was written by him because of the focus on the Reserve Bank. So if this is his speech and he's saying "I," it means he intends to stay, which I think is really positive for everyone. I think he'd make a brilliant finance minister. The guy we had before I also thought was really good. It's unfortunate, but I think if he can stay, I think he'll be good and just implement this 5-point plan. It's a good 5-point plan, but it's a kind of plan everybody could come up with. Yeah. The proof is in the pudding.
Indeed it is. Afzal Khan there from Raft Consulting. Bulelani, over to you.
Thank you so much, Arabile. Still taking some reactions, and now we're going to focus on Labour. Joining me is the General Secretary of COSATU, Mr. Bheki Ntshalintshalile. Obviously, a lot of focus around the issue of the government wage bill. Your thoughts on that?
I think the minister wasted a lot of time talking about those issues. To us, that is a non-issue. We got an agreement negotiated over a long time in relation to the wage negotiations and the working conditions of the public sectors. I think he's attacking the wrong people. He should be focusing more to the people that have huge packs, including himself. He should have started at the top with the ministers, with the members of Parliament and address, because that's where the money goes, not to the poor people who cannot afford to have houses, etc., who are doing double jobs. You can see it in terms of the overtime that they are working. It's because there are shortages. They are doubling it up, and there's evidence given by other ministers that in the public sectors, in the health system, for an example, there's a shortage of health workers. If you go to the safety and security, the police, you go to the doctors, you go to the ratio in terms of teacher education. So in order to address those people, indirectly the wage bill will increase in relation to those issues, but it does not mean people are earning higher. If you have to cut it at the top where it belongs, be able to recover money and put it back to the fiscus, and if you do that, it will change, it will tilt, and balances will indicate that there's no huge wage bill that he's talking about.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Bekinjali, the General Secretary of COSATU, giving us his thoughts around the issues of the government wage bill. We're now close to you, Abra.
Bulelani, thank you very much. I'm speaking to a gentleman now. His badge says his name is CEO Bulela Fobosi, and he's from Rhodes University. You spoke to me about early childhood development. That's your field of interest. So in relation to what the minister says, what do you have to say about what he said regarding education?
Well, regarding education, really, what shocked me is the fact that the minister mentioned that there's going to be reprioritization of funding from other programs that are underspending to other programs, that deserve, that money, So, and I thought of early childhood development grant, which was introduced last year, the last financial year, and that grant had underperformance and underspending of about 59 million. In the first financial year. So it is very disappointing for me to see that there was underspending in the grant. For example, your Eastern Cape had underspending of about 48%. So that concerns me. So I was wondering whether that grant is going to be affected, and what does it mean for the learners who are coming from Eastern Cape, from the ECD centers that still need to benefit from that grant, that even don't benefit in order to improve early childhood development foundation phase of basic education, because I think in order for learners to progress well in their education, they need to have a very good foundation. So early childhood development is very important.
Thank you so much. I do think that is a very valid concern and question that you are posing. Lots of people expressing concern about education and the state of education and what exactly is happening in that sector financially. Adabili, we're crossing back to you now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abra. Well, Tabi Leoka, economist, joining me now. Tabi, zero rated. We saw those 3 items come in. That must certainly bring a smile to your face.
Definitely. This was a labor of love, but a lot of work that went into the zero rating process. 2 months with a great team of people, and I am elated that the 3 that we recommended have been considered for zero rating.
Growth projections, though, not looking too good.
Not looking too good, but that was expected given that the Treasury had expected 1.5% in February, and we knew that we will have to have a projection that is below 1%.
But is 0.7 still ambitious, or is that perhaps attainable?
So I think that we could see a rebound in the second half of the year. We're already seeing a lot better high-frequency numbers, especially manufacturing. So we could actually see around 0.7, but 0.7 is still a very low number in terms of growth. Growth will be a problem, especially when we look at what we require in terms of revenues. An increase of revenues is supported by an increase in growth.
And expenditure looks like, obviously, again, the main issue here. But if you take a look at our debt situation, that goes all the way back up to 4%, having expected it to go to 3.6% of GDP.
Yeah, that was also disappointing because I expected the debt profile to improve slightly, and it has deteriorated. We also saw deterioration in the debt to GDP figures, and that means that these are alarm bells for rating agencies. I don't expect them to downgrade us, but I think that this is something that they will look at with very close eyes and look at especially budget and see what comes out of there, because hopefully there'll be slight improvements, but again we need growth. I also feel that there's a lot of reprioritization going into investments and infrastructure investment, and even though infrastructure is great because it creates sustainable long-term growth, my problem is, and I question I think we're overly focusing on infrastructure without considering jobs. So who's going to do the infrastructure projects, and for who? Is it a case of if they build it, they will come, and so you're building road infrastructure, you're building railway, who's going to use that railway? If you're building bridges, who's going to build those bridges? Who's going to utilize those bridges if people can't afford, either businesses can't afford to travel over them, consumers can't afford to drive over them, fuel prices have increased. So I just don't know what the correlation, whether there's a strong correlation between jobs and also infrastructure, and that needs to be looked into.
Lots of questions being answered there by Tabilioka, economist, who joins us to unpack that budget. Bulelani, I'll cross over to you for more political rhetoric as well.
Well, thanks again, Arabile. Of course, the center focus of this mini budget is around growth and job creation. And now we're going to be joined by Minister for Small Business Development, Minister Lindiwe Zulu. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, over 20 billion rand that was meant for SMMEs, but municipalities are essentially failing to pay SMMEs on time. Your department, what are you doing? What measures are you putting in place to ensure that SMMEs, the drivers of the economy, are paid on time?
Well, what is important to note is what the Minister of Finance himself said about strengthening the governance structures at a municipal level, but also making sure that we employ the right people for the right job. And my experience in the 5 years that I have been in office, I do also realize that there is a weakness in the system, because for small and medium enterprises to be assisted, we've got to make sure that they don't always rely on what national government is presenting to them. Provincial structures, local structures should be the first point of call for our SMMEs. And so I'm very happy with the Minister even going to an extent of saying there is a set aside amount of money which we are supposed to use to ensure that we capacitate those that are at the level of local government, because those are the people who are supposed to assist your small and medium enterprises. Putting that aside, I think the budget, it's a midterm, by the way. I think we need to keep that in mind, because this is not necessarily the budget. This is just a framework of what we're going to do in the interventionist period of time before next year's budget. What I think is important for SMMEs to watch out for is the amount of money which has been said is going to be spent on infrastructure development. What has that got? How much of that is going to be spent on SMMEs? Do SMMEs even know where to access those opportunities? The Minister also spoke about township and rural development. Those are the opportunities for SMMEs, and my message to SMMEs is that get to the nearest departments that deal with those issues. Transport, building of roads and all that in the township. Where are the opportunities for SMMEs? Our responsibility obviously is to then push those departments which have been named here as with opportunities to say, tell us what's in there for small and medium enterprises. Let us also direct the SMMEs to that road.
Another big concern, Minister, is always the issue around the cost and the complexity of starting businesses in South Africa, which is something that really some international investors have been complaining about. Locally and internationally, what is the department doing to ensure that you simplify that process so that it can become easier to do business in South Africa?
We work together with the Department of Trade and Industry because we must not also be seen in isolation. We are one government, and one government needs to be coordinated in order for us to be able to do that. The good thing is that we just go into the investment summit. Some of the issues that we are dealing with, we will be breaking down to the investors, giving them assurance, giving them direction as to where we think they can put their money in terms of investment. Yes, of course, our task is to make it easy for investors, but investors on the other hand, they also need to have an understanding that we've got a problem in South Africa, that is a transformation of our economy, that is introducing people who were never in the space of business. Hence, we also want to say to the investors, while we have our BEE codes, while we have our supplier development codes, while we have all those codes, we want to engage with them in such a way that they appreciate why we have those codes, and we must help them to comply with those codes. And it is possible for them to comply through the Department of Trade and Industry, through the Department of Economic Development, through our own department, but through all other government departments. The key for us here, let's go to that investment forum, and I'm happy as the Department of Small Business Development that we also have been working together with all departments and the planning towards that. So we have a role as the Department of Small Business Development to go and sell the idea of an importance of investing in small and medium enterprises who have an opportunity for investment return, because we do appreciate investors won't want to invest in something where they won't get returns. Investment is possible in South Africa, and SMMEs must not be ignored in that space.
Talking about the ignorance around SMMEs, the president is always making the focus that growth is going to be driven by both international investors as well as local investors. Now, with regards to this investment summit that kicks off tomorrow, what is the space for small businesses locally?
Well, we have to start with the local or local investors, because international investors will not have the confidence if they realize that your own investors who have a possibility of investing are not investing. And I think the preparation for this summit has pulled our local investors, has pulled government. So business, government, civil society and all have been pulled into one place where they are told we need to work together in order for international investors to have the confidence. We just came out of the job summit, and so from the job summit we could see the commitments that were made by our own local investors, and I know that the coming investment you will hear of quite big investments. Some of the people that are going to be making those announcements, fortunately for us, are the ones who we have been working with as a Department of Small Business Development. They've put some money in terms of supplier development, in terms of ensuring that they train our own people. I'm not going to name them here. You will hear when they are being named, and you can trace back and see how much we have worked with them. They made the announcement, some of them at the job summit. They're going to be making even greater announcements at the investment summit. So I do believe, and as the president believes, and as the government believes, and I'm sure as the Minister of Finance believes, the importance of addressing transformation in South Africa will depend on how much we empower your small and medium enterprises. They're addressing the issues of unemployment and inequality will also very much rest on how much support we give to small and medium enterprises. I don't see any other future, because if developed countries can tell you about the importance of small and medium enterprises, and we as South Africa fail to see that, then it means there's something that's not right. But I have confidence, because I've had support at government level where all ministers are looking forward to exposing to SMMEs what is possible and what is available within government departments. But lastly, I think there's got to be an understanding that while government is opening up the opportunities, private sector also needs to open up opportunities within their value chain, because they are very well connected, they've got deeper pockets, and SMMEs don't have that. So if we can all just have an understanding that in order to create the jobs that we want, we have to work together as South Africa. I liked the budget speech of the midterm budget of the minister, because I think that it did address some of the challenges that we face as a Department of Small Business Development.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Lindiwe Zulu, Minister for Small Business Development, giving us some thoughts and food for thought around the medium-term budget policy statement. Of course, now the focus is going to be looking forward to the investment summit that kicks off tomorrow in Johannesburg. On that note, we say goodbye from Parliament, and it's back to you in Johannesburg.